Turkey. It was completed in the year 537, and it stood as the world's largest cathedral for a millennium. From the floor, you gaze up 182 feet to the top of the dome. That's nearly as high as the Golden Gate Bridge. Sitting adjacent to the North Anatolian Fault, this resilient structure has withstood 1,500 years of earthquakes, some of which decimated the surrounding buildings in the city. And yet it stands. Wanting to create a magnificent place of worship, Roman Emperor Justinian summoned two top minds, a mathematician and an engineer, to design and build a structure of impossible vastness. He envisioned a heavenly dome presiding above a great rectangular hall combining traditional Roman and Christian places of worship. And this was a problem because it had never been done before. This was the problem laid before the architects. Because to place a circular dome upon a rectangular base was viewed to be impossible and unstable. Its designers were called to invent something entirely new. As a result, Hagia Sophia changed the future of architecture. Like Hagia Sophia, the concept of resilience is both mysterious and daunting. We want to get inside it to understand it. We're going to investigate what makes it up and how it works. My intention with you here is to empower your ability to lead the purpose-driven for resilience through demystifying this topic and providing actionable guidance. So let's go on a tour of resilience together. We're going to approach it from a few vantages. We'll deconstruct the term and we're going to build it back up. And we're going to discover exactly what it takes to master resilient leadership. So here's our working definition. For a person, for an organization, or for a community, resilience is the ability to cope and thrive through adversity. And to understand resilience, we've got to talk about adversity. So let's collect some data right now. I'd like you to please raise your hand if you'd say you and your organization have experienced adversity recently. Okay, I'm counting. Okay, it's 100%. So I offer that for a group of people who come to work for an organization because of their concern for the suffering of others, to experience that suffering every day, is adverse. They're swimming in adversity. So we're going to explore this further. Now, to understand adversity, we've got to talk about intention, because adversity is thwarted intention. No intention, no adversity. And whether we're conscious of it or not, we always have an intention behind our actions. Even relaxing in the hammock, right? Stretching out on a summer day, you have an intention. What's your intention?
Relax.
Yeah, to relax, right? And that mosquito buzzing in your ear, what's that? It's adversity. Yeah. Without intention, we've got no context for adversity. And so neither for resilience. Here's a quote. "My intention is to acknowledge our past, be healing for our present, and passionate for a future where we work together lovingly." Does anyone recognize that quote? It's from a tweet sent by Lady Gaga at 7:05 a.m. on the morning she sang the national anthem at the presidential inauguration. She went on to say, "I will sing to the hearts of all the people who live on this land." That's intention. You want to ask yourself, in setting your intention, what is this really for, what I'm up to? Intention is the primary element necessary for resilience. And you can evoke it with this question. What is this really for? Okay, most of you will be familiar with the grinning smile of Canadian goaltender Stephanie Labbé, Alberta native. Okay, so Stephanie saw us through to a gold medal through a grueling shootout at the end of the gold medal match, right? And this smile was authentic. Afterwards, she said, "I was in my happy place," right? Under extraordinary pressure, in front of a global audience, to accomplish your dream for yourself and your country. She was thriving. She's in her happy place. But this is her just a few days before, in the match against Japan. So she left her net to challenge an opponent. She actually committed a penalty, and she injured herself quite badly. She bruised her ribs and ended up in the hospital. This is her after. She later said, "I knew it was my fault," right? I had a responsibility. So she didn't leave the game. She got back in net, and she made that save. I could watch this all day. So, what a lot of people don't know, this is her making one of the big saves in that penalty shootout at the end of the gold medal match. What a lot of people don't know, what we didn't know at the time, and which she shared about later, was what she experienced between those two matches. Okay, she had to miss the next match. She was in and out of the hospital trying to get a green light to play in the final game. She had no idea whether she was going to be able to play in this gold medal match, which was her dream. And she was so overstimulated from her body and her mind being so primed to perform at this event that she had a real struggle regulating her emotions in those few days. She couldn't even go to breakfast with her team. And she spent almost the entire time in her room meditating so that she could be ready to play. Okay, so that's determination. Determination that shows up to play through adversity, but also the determination it took for her to sit quietly in her room for 3 days so she could prepare. I'd wager that was actually the harder part. So you can ask yourself to evoke this determination. What am I committed to no matter what? Back to Hagia Sophia. Justinian's architects were tasked with constructing the impossible, a cathedral with an enormous dome perched upon this vast rectangular atrium, and they came up with a series of innovations that transformed the possibility of architecture. First, they placed the dome on 4 arches. You can see them here. This seems like an absurd solution, a little bit like balancing a teacup on the top of 4 beer coasters, right? And I bet someone in this room has tried that. But it was part of the genius of their solution. They then added these 2 semicircular domes on the side to adorn the remaining rectangular footprint. Second, they invented new building materials. They created a new type of plaster to form the dome, which was incredibly thin. The whole dome was only 1 brick thick the whole way across. Okay? And then they made the bricks that they created the arches with by baking them at a different temperature than was the custom, creating a more porous material that was lighter, that allowed them to build such high arches. And perhaps most importantly, they left window openings at the base of the dome, and you can see them here, just at the base of the dome, tiny sort of rectangular window openings all around the base of that central dome. And they did this because they observed that these were the points where the structure wanted to actually crack naturally. They were stress points, so they just left them open. These design elements would ultimately prove to be the secret of Hagia Sophia's durability over 1.5 millennia. And engineers have studied the structure, and they've discovered that during an earthquake, it flexes as the energy transfers across the dome and down the arches. This contrasts with the main form of architecture at the time, which was just to build with the heaviest possible thing you could, right? They build with these enormous stone blocks. And so, the brilliance of Hagia Sophia is really the spaces its architects left open. So, you can ask yourself, where can I flex with my environment? Now, this is where we've gotten to on our journey today. Resilience allows us to fulfill our intention through adversity using both determination and flexibility, right? Which may seem like opposing forces. How can I be both determined and flexible? Tim Vogel and Kathleen Sutcliffe did their research mostly in a hospital setting, medical institutions. They identified 3 key success factors for resilient organizations. They believe they will succeed, they learn voraciously, acquiring as much feedback as they possibly can, and they activate collective wisdom, right? They activate the inherent knowledge and experience of their people and put it to use, translate it through into new practices. But organizations aren't just these inanimate objects, right? They're composed of people, right? They're communities of people. And people have 3 orientations to their work. You can relate to your work like a job, which is kind of transactional, right? It's what I do, it's what I get paid for. You can relate to it like a career, right? There's an ambitious arc to what I'm up to here, right? I'm trying to get somewhere. Or you can relate to it like your calling in life. And in our sector, we have a lot of people who relate to their work like a calling in life. What motivates that commitment to work? Well, there are 3 types of motivation, 3 types of commitment that have been identified by researchers here at Western, Natalie Allen and John Meyer, who literally wrote the book on this topic. Okay, so effective commitment. You can have an effective commitment to your work, which really is driven by your affinity towards the work, your affinity towards the purpose or the cause, or even your affinity for just the enjoyment of doing it. That's the strongest type of commitment. You might have a normative commitment to your work, which is like, I feel a duty or an obligation. I have a duty or an obligation to my coworkers, to my organization, to the reason for us doing this, right? And thirdly, you might have a continuance commitment, which is the least strong, and it revolves around having a fear of leaving. The only reason I stay in this work is because I like the alternative less. So I stick around. Now, like I mentioned, the strongest type of commitment is this effective commitment. And so what we want to do here, which I think we have a great foundation for in nonprofit already, is tap in to underlying intrinsic motivations that people have for their work. Okay? Richard Ryan and Edward Deci identified these 3 factors. These are heavily studied, relied upon psychological factors for intrinsic motivation. These are the 3 psychological needs that people need. And I'll say that I've looked at quite a lot of research in this area, and it's unequivocal across the board. Consistently, when organizations, when employees who work for organizations where they say that these needs are met, they have better job performance, better job compliance, better job satisfaction, overall better mental health, and lower turnover. This is what they mean. Okay, autonomy. It means I have influence over this. Not total authority or total control, but I have some influence on this. Competency, I'm capable of this. Or I have the ability, I'm given the opportunity to learn and grow, so I can become capable. And relatedness. This matters beyond me. I'm part of a community of people, with colleagues, coworkers, the community I'm supporting, supporters, volunteers. I'm part of a community that I'm related to, who this also matters to. Let's look at each one of these in sequence. So, Dr. Ruth Simmons, past president of Brown University, this is what she has to say about how she cultivates this autonomy in her team. Right off the get-go, she says, I always tell the people that I hire that I don't hire them because they're able to follow the rules. I hire them because they have good judgment. When employees do not feel trusted by their employer, through giving that sense of autonomy, I have some control over what I get to do. When employees do not feel that trust, it promotes employee cynicism, and it leads to diminished employee contributions. And this is work done by Dr. Kira Shabram from the University of Washington, who studied this in animal welfare organizations across North America. Okay, let's move on to competency. So 70% of nonprofit employees value professional development. It's not a surprise. And yet 43% say they're not getting enough. That's a risk. Relatedness. Robert Quinn is one of the thought leaders in identifying different types of leadership styles that leaders bring to their work. And in his work studying leaders in action in their organizations, he found that managers who lead with a collaborative approach, right? They seek collaboration themselves, they encourage it on their teams. Those managers deliver the best results in both their organizational effectiveness, like their job performance of their teams, and in their financial performance. Better even than the sort of more authoritarian leaders that they were compared to. So, based on those research findings, I have some recommendations for nonprofit leaders. 2 different styles of management that come straight out of that flow straight from that research. The first is results-based management. You create a shared vision that inspires. You define exactly what success looks like. You relentlessly gather feedback and you measure the outcomes. And then you celebrate the difference you've made together. The second is participative management. You develop your people as decision makers. And you do that using a coaching approach, right? As people may make mistakes, but you work with them to identify where what factors led to the mistake, and you coach them through those mistakes so that they can develop that competency themselves to make their own decisions. And you lead change initiatives from the ground up, right, through a participatory approach, so everyone has buy-in and involvement. So, let's zoom back out to these 3 factors for developing resilience. Intention. You're going to lead with the intention of Lady Gaga, and you're going to ask yourself, what is this for? You're going to bring the determination of Steph Labbe, and you're going to ask yourself, what am I committed to no matter what? And you're going to bring the flexibility of Hagia Sophia. Ask yourself, where can I flex with this environment? Now, I promised you we'd come back to this tension between determination and flexibility. I'm 10 years old, and I've just stepped off the stage from the school musical, and I'm ecstatic. And my friend asks me, now that you've been in your first musical, what are you going to do now? And I say, I'm going to Disneyland, because I really am going to Disneyland. Next day, I'm in the car with my mom, my stepdad, my little sister, and we're on our way to Disneyland. I can have my birthday there, right? This is a dream. I love Disney. I've seen all the movies. I know the words to all the songs. And as we walk through the gates to the park, 2 days later, the music's filled with air. The music fills the air, and I'm in heaven. We had 2 magical days. What I didn't know then was that the next evening, I'd be sitting in the courtyard with my mom, while she very gracefully shared the news with me that my dad back home had had a heart attack and he had died. Yeah. And this is why I actually didn't talk about this very much over the course of my life. It was because I didn't want people to feel sorry for me, right? Getting back on that plane the next day, I buckled my seatbelt tight, and I swore to myself I'd never get my hopes up again, right? I became very determined, setting goals for myself, for things I wanted to achieve, but I lived kind of a constrained existence. And now we went back home, and I went back home to my friends and to school, and I had a very privileged upbringing. And my childhood wasn't bad or tragic by any stretch, but I had that constraint, right, of wanting to make sure that I could know and understand everything around me so that I could make sure that I didn't get, swept away with looking forward to something again, so that I wouldn't have to deal with a disappointment like that again, right? So, one thing I began to practice was this idea of beginner's mind, right? That in the moment, you can be open to anything that's possible. Just 2.5 years ago, I went back to Disneyland for the first time with my family, with my wife and our 2 sons, and we spent an incredible time there. And at the end of the 2 days, I had it fixed in my mind that there was going to be this sort of perfect ending to our trip, right? Kind of a rigid idea of where I wanted it to go. I was determined to get to Main Street by 4 p.m. for the Main Street Parade, which happens every day. That was going to be the perfect ending for our trip in Disneyland. But my 7-year-old son and I, Noah and I, were way at the back of the park. Do you guys know where the Three Amigos is? It's 3:57, there's no way we're getting to Main Street in time for that parade on time. And I started to finding myself getting tense and frustrated. And I took a breath. I said, okay, look, let's bring a beginner's mind to this and just get present to where you are. You're here at Disneyland with your 7-year-old son. He has no expectations. He's at Disneyland, right? So just enjoy yourself. And right in that moment, the crowd opened up around us, and a flash parade of Disney characters came out all around us. Blue and gold and pink streamers shot in the air. And as the music played, the characters all marched down the street ahead of us. I turned and I looked at Noah, and he looked up at me, and he grabbed my hand, and he said, "Let's go, Daddy." And away we went. So this is what I'd like to invite you to consider, that resilience is a practice, not a place to get to. And you might want to ask yourself, how can I look at this newly when you find yourself in that tension? Look for this space, just like those windows at the base of the dome of Hagia Sophia, and ask yourself, how can I look at this newly? Where is the space here? Because resilience is what the beginner's mind evokes, moment to moment.